Hey guys, welcome back to Pokemon TCG Pocket. In today's video, we're checking out some very interesting results from Ursi Day's 1,368 player tournament that just happened over the weekend. We are seeing a bit of a shift in the meta. I like to think of it as a consolidation into the best decks, and then those best decks trying to counter each other so that they can win that key matchup. It is a very interesting shift we are seeing, both in the Mewtwo decks and the Pikachu decks. I want to talk about that, go through the winners, also go through some of the other decks like the Arcanine deck, which is also seeing some play, talk about it versus Charizard and stuff like that. So let's get into it. Now, before we get into it, I have to give Ursi a massive shout out for running these tournaments on a weekly basis. I do believe she will keep going. I will leave a link to her link tree in the description below. You can get her Twitch, you can get her YouTube, and you can go watch it there. I will leave also a direct link to the VOD on YouTube from her stream of the top 32 if you want to go in and watch some of those matches. But once again, a massive shout out to Ursi. These things are an absolute mammoth undertaking to go ahead and host these tournaments on a weekend, every weekend essentially. So massive shout out. Now let's jump in and talk a little bit about the meta that we saw happening. So obviously the top two decks were going to be the Mewtwo and the Pikachu. If we go to the metagame here, we can see the percentage of entries. Once again, 1,368 or something like that entries. And so if we look at the metagame, you can see 26% of the share was Mewtwo EX and Gardevoir. Now, the Pikachu EX, I like to include all four of the variants that they list here, which is the Pikachu EX Zebra Striker, the Pikachu Raichu, Pikachu Electrode, and Pikachu Zapdos. So that would bring it up to about, what's that, 13, that's about 21%, about 27%, so about probably 31-32% with Pikachu EX in any form. So Pikachu EX was actually more heavily represented, but just in different forms. And then the other one was obviously the Gardevoir. We then have Charizard in here at a 6.29%, and then we drop down to 3% for Starmie Articuno. We get some Blaines, and as you can see, everything drops off a cliff from there on in, and we don't see very high representation of anything besides the Pikachu and the Mewtwo. These are definitely the two current meta decks, if you will. Now, if we go ahead and we check out the standings, you can see that we ended up with Mewtwo EX heavily dominating the top cut. We did have some Pikachu, a lot of Pikachus in there as well. We did have a couple Starmie variants, one Greninja and one Articuno in there. And besides that, we had the one Charizard and the one Arcanine. But like I said, we're going to start off talking about the Mewtwo deck changes, the Pikachu EX deck changes, and what's been happening. But I want to start off with looking at, firstly, the first three, the top three finishing Mewtwo decks, because the interesting thing is they are all different. And I love the tech that we are seeing. So first of all, let's just open this as an image because it's a bit easier. So this was the winning deck. Once again, massive shout out to Hanamon for this deck getting first place. Now, this is your more standard Mewtwo deck that we've become accustomed to seeing, where you just run Ralts and Mewtwo EX, and those are your basics. Away you go, you set up the Mewtwo and you start churning out. Now, this works really well basically against anything, and it can still clutch games even if you don't get that Gardevoir out there because of the pressure that Mewtwo EX has. You can also play a Mewtwo EX at front as a wall while you set up your other one, depending on what your hand looks like. That's just your standard build. Now, the next one I want to jump into is this one, which was the other top cut, which is using the baby Mewtwo. Now, this is a really cool tech we are seeing, and it is being used to sort of counter the Pikachu deck. And I think that's the main place, the main reason for these additions we see in some of these Mewtwo decks. I could be wrong, but it's because the normal Mewtwo still only has the 2 retreat cost, which may be expensive for some decks, but when you're running Gardevoir line, you do have the chance to actually retreat out with it. But what this offers you is it offers you that basic Mewtwo to slap into your deck as a bit of a wall, and then while that Mewtwo is sitting there as your wall, it can take one hit from anything that the Pikachu deck has to offer, except for, we'll talk about in a minute, Raichu and a Zapdos with flips. But those take a while to ramp up. So in the early game of a Pikachu deck, it's going to survive at least one hit from anything it has to offer, which is a very important thing to go ahead and stall so that you can build up your Mewtwo. And the other thing is it's only a 1-point sacrifice, which is also a pretty good wall. Now, we have seen other variants like Kangaskhan in here as well, where you can actually sacrifice 1 energy and start putting pressure on with it. But this Mewtwo functions well because it can also if you do get that Gardevoir build up, you can start loading it up and actually threaten with it or get the cheap retreats with it. So that's why the Mewtwo is a really good tech. And once again, you can sacrifice it for 1 point, then maybe you bring, if you're struggling, you just bring up your Ralts or Curlier, whatever stage is at, you let it take another hit, and then you load up your Mewtwo further, and then you can bring in your Mewtwo with enough energy to sweep the rest of the Pikachu lineup. So that is what I think we are seeing is the tech of this. Now, obviously, if this Mewtwo goes down and you slap a Ralts up, you are, Sabrina bait, but eventually that's always going to be a bit of a situation. But I think the tech of the baby Mewtwo is an absolutely great one. Now, the other deck list that was in the top 3 of the Mewtwo decks that we saw was this one here running the Jinx. Now, the Jinx is an interesting tech, and the Jinx is a tech that I loved in Mewtwo from the start of the game because it allows you to punish setup a little bit. It's not like Alakazam, you're doing 30 plus 20s, but if something comes out and they put, 1 energy on it, you're swinging for 50, which that 50 swing is actually really good. It's really solid for 2 energy, kind of like what you get with the Mewtwo EX. Now, you can play the Jinx one of 2 ways. You can play it as a mini wall. It's not as good as the baby Mewtwo, so that you just put it up front and then you start setting up a Mewtwo if you have it. But what it does offer, what the baby Mewtwo doesn't offer, is it allows you to set that energy up on it so that you have something else to pressure your opponent, and hopefully you can add the pressure while you set up your Gardevoir and then maybe get your Mewtwo out. So it's once again another 1 point. It can be a threat. It can be used both ways. Not as good as a stall option as the baby Mewtwo, obviously. Not working as well against the Pika matchup, but it does let you offer that early pressure, which then allows you to get the kills with maybe a Psychic Sphere from the Mewtwo on things that it would otherwise need its Psy Drive to kill. So I do like the Jinx tech as well. I'm going to have to play more Mewtwo. I personally don't play it enough because I don't like it as much as other decks, but I am liking all these techs, and I got to test them all out a bit more thoroughly than what I have already, but I do like the Jinx tech in this one as well. So that is what we are seeing from the Mewtwo. Once again, we had 3 different builds of Mewtwo in here, and then we had all of those in the top 3 results of the Mewtwo standings, all with different builds being rank 1, 2, and 4 for the overall tournament, which was really good to see. Once again, massive shout out, Brazil really representing in this tournament by the looks. So that is the Mewtwo. I'm really liking what people are shifting to for the Mewtwos. It's a very interesting thing. Now I want to switch focus and talk about the Pikachus, because if you notice, most tournaments we were seeing like Pikachu Zebra Striker, Pikachu Electrode, and Pikachu Zapdos being the higher ranked ones. But now we are seeing all these Pikachu and Raichu EX. Pikachu EX and Raichu. And I really do like what we are seeing with this one. Let's just go here. So what we are seeing is the Raichu Lieutenant Surge come in to be super clutch against the Mewtwo EX matchup. Now, obviously, Raichu can only be doing 140 damage, but we are running, you will see... Often, I think you'll see every deck that runs, or at least most of them that are running Raichu, are running the 2 Giovanni. Now, unfortunately, the one downside to this is that you can't use the Lieutenant Surge into the Giovanni, but, if you happen to have that Pikachu getting set up in the back row, whilst you've got your Pikachu EX swinging up front, then you can bring in the Raichu and then kill a threat. Otherwise, the other thing is if you deal some chip damage to Mewtwo, then that 140 with the Lieutenant Surge is enough to go on the revenge. So unfortunately, you can't get the perfect play of just go like, Lieutenant Surge on the Raichu and then straight into Giovanni into a one-shot kill. It doesn't work like that, but it is the best workaround that the Pika deck has at the moment besides the Zapdos flips. But once again, I love the Zebra Striker build of the Pikachu EX one, but unfortunately, it's just not ideal for the Mewtwo matchup. And because if we go back to what we are seeing over here, which is in the metagame, if we see that we're seeing like basically the whole game is being dominated by Mewtwo and Pikachu, you're gonna have to go ahead and build decks to counter what you are seeing in the metagame. So that is where we are seeing a bunch of the Raichu come in with the Lieutenant Surge, which once again I think is a really nice thing. I love the way that the meta always evolves in card games based on what we are seeing the most usage of, because you obviously want to counter the things that you're going to see the most. However, it can lead to some awkward matchups against other decks, which is obviously the awkward part. And keep in mind with this stuff, There is obviously a lot of RNG with who you get paired with and stuff like that, but I do like it that we are seeing the evolution of the meta with the Mewtwo decks moving towards using some of those 1-point cards with the Jinx, the Kangaskhan we saw a bit last week, and also the baby Mewtwo, and then the Pikachu shifting towards that Raichu lineup, which may not be the most efficient lineup for getting Pikachu EX online, but because Raichu is the counter to the Mewtwo, it is seeing a bunch of usage. Now, the other thing that I want to go to back over to standings is have a chat about the Arcanine EX once again getting into the top 8, which is fantastic to see. And we can see we had a Charizard in position 10. Now, my takeaway from this is that when we are seeing a lot of Mewtwo, but we're also seeing more Pikachu. And Charizard kind of struggles against Pikachu because it's like, unless you get like godly hands and perfect flips, like it's hard to keep up with the pace of Pikachu. Whereas the Arcanine build, if we jump into this and have a look at the Arcanine build, we do have the ability to get online really quick with the Arcanine, and then the Arcanine is going to one-shot anything from the Pikachu EX deck, except for a Zapdos, which you can do with the Giovanni, which you're running 2 of in this deck. So I do think that the Arcanine is so well matched up to the Pikachu EX, and that is why you're going to see a lot more of it, in my opinion, because we're seeing more Pikachus than Mewtwo's, even though Mewtwo's appearing to be a little bit stronger now, depending on how it pans out. But we are seeing more Pikachus once you include all the different variants. So the Arcanine is actually probably going to perform better in most cases, because Arcanine is so much easier to get online with Charizard because you don't have that extra evolution involved in it. You only have 3 energy, and then you're pretty much good to go ahead and start swinging. And like I said, it can one-hit KO anything in the Pikachu deck except for a Zapdos, which it can do with the Giovanni. So it is very, very powerful. And keep in mind, even once it takes its 20 damage, it is still going to live anything that the Pikachu EX deck has to offer, except for the Raichu and obviously flips on the Zapdos. So I do think the Arcanine EX is just a fantastic deck poised in the position of the current meta. However, if we go ahead and look at the Charizard deck, now this is going to have the better matchup against the Mewtwo decks, because the Mewtwo decks, obviously, Charizard, you just need to set that thing up and away you go. And you can see here, very similar to what's happening in the Mewtwo decks, we do have the tech usage of the baby Charizard there as another option just to get that evolution. It's not the same reason as the Mewtwo deck, obviously, but we're seeing the baby versions get used. This one, the purpose is so that you can get into a Charizard quicker. Like, because if you can't draw into the Charizard, you're kind of boned. Now, obviously, you still run the risk of not drawing that Charmeleon and being bricked. So it is a bit awkward. Charizard is probably one of the most prone decks to bricking and just not getting the combo pieces you need. But, you know, still having 150 damage, when we look at the meta, it's going to one-hit kill anything in Pikachu EX. It's going to kill the Mewtwo EX. The only problem that this thing has is it's 150 HP, and it's basically susceptible to a revenge kill from a Mewtwo EX. But depending on, you know, positioning, you can come in and swing with it pretty hard. So I do like the tech of that. But once again, I think the Charizard is much more poised for the Mewtwo matchup, whereas the Arcanine is better for the Pikachu matchup. Neither of them being the optimal in the current state, because as we are seeing that, you know, it is really the Pikachus and the Mewtwo's shining. But these are definitely an option and working really well in their respective matchups. If it was the type of thing where you could side deck out cards and you could run the Arcanine and the Charizard lines and you could side deck them out between battles, that would be an amazing thing, and I would love that, because then tournaments would get super spicy. But at the moment, that is what we are seeing from the fire decks between the Charizard and also the Arcanine, which is really good to see. But that pretty much wraps up the things I want to talk about. Like I said, we did see a couple Starmie decks coming in here. Let's just have a quick browse at this one. Open as image. As you can see, just going the basic standard stuff with the Greninja line. I do love the Greninja plays. I like putting him into anything, into any random decks. I love the Alakazam Greninja decks. I run the Arbok Greninja. He's just a fun card to play with. And obviously, Starmie's power is fantastic, but unfortunately, with so many Pikachus in the meta, this deck is always going to struggle to find a home just because of the way it functions. Also, you know, struggling for those big hits on the Mewtwo EX makes it a little bit susceptible to that and not the greatest matchup, but still nonetheless a great deck. With whichever variant you're playing it with, whether it be the Greninja or the Articuno line, still a great deck, but just kind of forced out of the meta in the current state. And that is the basic roundup. Like I said, Mewtwo EX and Pikachu EX still looking to be the shining lights of the tournament scene at the moment, with getting some new techs with the Mewtwo running those extra 1-pointers in the deck for a bit of flexibility, and then Pikachu looking like Raichu being the number one favorite at the moment for that counter to the Mewtwo EX. But that is going to be it for this one, guys. Once again, massive shout out to Ursi for hosting this. I'll leave all the links in the description, and as always, thanks for watching. Hope you have an awesome day, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Cheers.